To the playlist for ecosystem ecology. This is actually a review video where we're going to go over all of the objectives for this content assessment. It is designed for middle school students trying to pass a content assessment in Summit platform, but it's useful for anyone who's trying to learn about the layers of ecological organization, biotic versus abiotic factors, population ecology, limiting factors, competition, affecting the way populations grow, and community ecology relationships, such as symbiosis, competition, predation, and other things like that. So if this is one of the things you're supposed to be learning about, this is the video for you. So the first objective is talking about how living and non-living parts of the ecosystem all work together to help the organisms that live inside of it. So you have biotic factors, which are all the living parts, and abiotic factors, which are the non-living parts. So food, predators, amount of producers, the prey, the diseases, parasites, key species that determine the entire ecosystem, mates, are all living parts of an ecosystem, while things like humidity, precipitation, water levels, groundwater, temperature, nutrients, phosphates, nitrates, nitrites, carbon dioxide, oxygen, amount of sunlight, toxins, shelter, many examples of things which affect the ecosystems which are not living, even if they strongly interact with life. Now, the levels of ecological organization include population, which is a group of organisms of the same species, like all the wolves in a forest. And there are intrinsic relationships that begin at that level of organization that is more complex than what you would see at an individual level. You have competition for mates. You have competition for resources. You have evolution, which happens at the population level across many generations. Organisms adapt to the environment in ways that go beyond just adapting in your lifetime, which is limited to the genes that you do have. In evolution, you can make new species and new changes in the population due to this process that takes many generations. It's also where population ecology and things like limiting factors and competition affect the way the populations grow. Then you have communities. Communities are the groups of all living things within the ecosystem. So not just the wolves, but all the trees and the deer and all the consumers, producers, and decomposers, the bacteria, the fungus, everything inside of it. And there's tons of relationships which matter in that ecosystem, from predation to competition to symbiosis, all kinds of things we're going to talk about in a second here that happen at the community level, even more complex than the population level. Finally, you have the ecosystem level, which is all the living and non-living things combined, and they are intrinsically connected. The water, the air, the soil clearly are necessary for life, but life can also affect those things because it's life that makes the soil rich. It's life that actually helps the air have the oxygen in it, or carbon dioxide in it, or nitrogen in it. It is the water cycle is completely connected to life, like we talked about in another lecture series. And in fact, organisms can change the flow of water. Organisms can change the amount of erosion that happens. Organisms are intrinsically connected to ecosystems. In my other video, I talked about that when I go in detail, I talk about what wolves did to Yellowstone Park. So if you're interested in that, you can see how much everything is connected. And those things are also something that we talk about in another lecture series that talks about biodiversity and how ecosystems are ability to survive and live through many generations are actually tied to the diversity of its system. So lots of interesting things happen at that level. Now, an ecosystem could be as small as a fallen tree and as large as an entire forest. But if you get a large ecosystem with a major habitat that contains major ecosystems within it, you may have what is called a biome. Like taiga is a special type of forest that has its own canopy, its own understory, its own meadows, and everything else in between. So there are many biomes on the Earth, though, many types of biomes, and all of them combined make this wonderful spaceship Earth, the only place in the universe that we're able to find life, which is our biosphere. Now, the second objective talks about how limiting factors can affect the way the populations grow. Without limiting factors, populations could grow exponentially. But unfortunately, there is competition and there are limited resources. So over time, the populations slow down its growth until they reach what is called the carrying capacity. If any population goes above it, it would immediately crash below it because the ecosystem simply cannot support more organisms than that. And that depends on a series of biotic and abiotic factors. So populations start growing slowly as it's hard to get mates. And then eventually when the mates find each other and reproduction starts going faster, it starts to blow up and it goes really fast and it looks exponential at first. But as you approach the carrying capacity, the rate starts to slow down. So what are some of the things that limit the growth? One of them is competition. Competition hurts everyone, all right? You might have plenty of mates, but because you're fighting for them, you end up killing each other. Same thing happens between predators. They compete for food. Different plants compete for sunlight. Different species competing for water. And even within a species, you're competing for other members of the species to be the one that has the most offspring, the one that survives. And that's how evolution is all about. But competition hurts it altogether. One way to see that very clearly is through invasive species. When an invasive species, which is one that does not belong to the ecosystem, gets entered into it, and a lot of times it will outcompete this natural native species because it doesn't have a natural predator. The other predators look at it as like, what is that? I'm not going to eat that. So because nothing eats it, it grows without hindrance. And also sometimes they have features that makes them grow faster and better than other species on that ecosystem. And they can also sometimes introduce diseases that end up killing them too. So with that three-pronged attack, they end up increasing exponentially while others crash to extinction. And that just shows you how important the impact of that is. Most invasive species, by the way, are introduced by human actions. When humans travel from one place to the other, a lot of times they inadvertently carry them, or sometimes they purposely release the, oh, I don't want that pet anymore. And somebody else thinks the same thing. And all of a sudden now you have alligators that are not supposed to be where they are, and snakes that were not supposed to be in they are, and plants which aren't supposed to be where they are because, oh, I want that tree in my backyard. And then you plant it, and then pollen spreads, and seed spreads, and fruit spreads, and all of a sudden there's trees of that kind all over where they shouldn't be, right? And it can cause harm to the natural ecosystem and everything else that depends on it. And because food webs are all interconnected, an invasive species can completely destabilize the ecosystem and cause serious problems for the ecosystem, like some of these examples on the screen here have caused. Other than competition, though, there are other limiting factors that also change how much a population can grow. The availability of nutrients and resources like sunlight and water, especially, they're the main ones. A desert can have a lot of sunlight, but not very low productivity because of lack of water. And you have plenty of water in the bottom of the ocean, but no sunlight, so you cannot produce at all. So those are the main ones. And then after that, you have the availability of nutrients, especially nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, and carbon. But then you also have micronutrients like calcium, magnesium, and sulfur, and even other microelements like heavy elements like iron and zinc and copper, magnesium, which are important for life. Without it, producers cannot build the food that we need to survive. All right. And so without food, that hurts everybody. The soil richness matters then, of course. The availability of shelter matters. How many mates are around matter. All of these are things that animals fight for and compete for, which cause a decrease in population growth as you run out of these resources. There's not enough to go around for everybody. Predation also changes the numbers of people because, of course, it lowers the numbers of prey. But, of course, if the prey gets eaten too much, then there's not enough food for the predators, and then they die. But with less predators, you end up getting more prey because now there's less prey getting eaten, and then they grow again. But then now the predators can grow again. And that creates a cycle where predators and prey are constantly going up and down because of that. Now, in natural ecosystems, it's not so simple because predators don't only eat one kind of prey usually, but it's still, the predators and prey numbers are limiting each other. Diseases, toxins, and parasites also limit the population growth. Because if you have a disease or a parasite or toxins, that will cause animals to die. Now, it's especially true when there's a lot of animals around, which is why cities cause a lot of pollution, which is why large herds of animals spread disease and parasites more. And this is especially true when there's migrations and in humans, when we travel across the world, carrying diseases and spreading them across the world, that leads to a lower number of survivals. You also have disasters, which kill indiscriminately. The other factors depend on the population size, how much competition you have, how many resources you have, the disease spreads. All of that depends on the population. But there are disasters that kill whether there's a lot of people or whether there's a few people, right? And there's many disasters in the world. The world is full of life, but it's also full of things that kill, like wildfires and tornadoes and hurricanes and volcanoes and earthquakes, tsunamis and droughts and global climate change. All of these things, massive pandemics, changes in chemistry levels because of massive volcanic eruptions. All of these things have, throughout the history of the Earth, caused many mass extinctions, including the current one, the sixth great mass extinction, which is probably the highest rate of extinction ever in the history of life, worse even than the Permian mass extinction that killed over 100 species a year. Millions are going to go extinct if things don't stop. And guess what the disaster is? Humans. That's right. That is our nature on this planet, to destroy life, apparently. I hope that we change our mind about that and that we preserve the beautiful spaceship Earth that we are in. Last but not least, each species can also have its own rate of growth. And sometimes that growth depends on how many people are around. Like mole rats will change how many offspring they have depending on the availability of resources and how many people are already around. But clearly, there's a difference in the growth rate between a bug and a fish that makes thousands of offspring and a bacteria that reproduces really fast versus elephant that only makes one child at a time, right? Now, the are also relationships at the community level or between different species, and that includes predation, where one species eats another, and that is something that costs energy for one, but gives the other one energy, right? So a wolf eating deer or a deer eating grass, competition hurts both, and that's when species are competing for things like a deer and a competing with other deer for water or grass, or a deer competing with zebra, or a wolf competing with a bear for prey. That ends up causing losses to both species. On a mutualism, one species hurts the other but doesn't gain anything from it. Like an elephant knocking down a tree that's on its path, it didn't get anything out of knocking down the tree. It just was in its path. But the tree, of course, dies. So it's negative for one, neutral for the other. And then you have symbiosis relationships, which are unique relationships have at least one organism that could not survive without the other. Examples are commensalism. That's when one organism gets help from the other, but then the other one gets nothing out of it. It's like a barnacle that grows in the back of a whale and wouldn't survive otherwise, because as the whale moves around, it actually filters the water that passes through it. Lots of barnacles live in the bottom of the ocean, but these particular types of barnacles, they rely on the whales to survive. Just like seeds can sometimes rely on animals to carry them from one place to the other, they get stuck to their coats. But that doesn't really hurt the animal or help them. So that's a neutral for the whale or for the animal that's carrying the seed. And so that's commensalism. Positive for one, neutral for the other. Mutualism is beneficial for both. Like like a bug getting nectar from the flower, which gets pollination from it, or a animal that eats the fruit and gets sustenance, but carries the seed and spreads it around. And lichen, which is an algae that makes food, and a fungus that eats the food and breaks it down back to nutrients, which the algae needs, the smallest ecosystem on Earth. Then finally, you have parasitism, which is when one organism sucks up the life of the other. So it's positive for one, negative for the other, like fleas and ticks and heartworms and things like that. So these are different types of relationships that exist at the community level. And that, my friends, finishes this power focus area on organisms and ecosystems and how they all relate to each other. I hope you found this helpful. Don't do anything that would make your mama proud. I'll see you in the next series.